Ancient secrets have long fascinated individuals from around the world. One of those secrets, holding within it deep magic and mystery, is sacred geometry. Sacred geometry, which is often referred to as the architecture of the universe, attributes specific geometric shapes and geometric proportions with having sacred and symbolic meanings. We can trace this back to ancient civilizations that believed in spiritual and magical symbolism through geometric patterns and the connectedness of all things. They believed that everything in the universe possesses a harmonious and balanced structure, and we can easily see this throughout nature, all the way down to a microscopic scale. One of the most interesting things about sacred geometry is that it is one of very few subjects that equally engages and satisfies both hemispheres of the brain simultaneously. It does so by meeting the right brain's desire for intuitive and opinion or feeling-based characteristics, while satisfying the left brain's search for sequential and logical data. And throughout time, artists and philosophers such as Leonardo da Vinci and Carl Jung have used the power of sacred geometry in their work for much the same reason. As young children, we learn to recognize shapes and patterns in order to form our ideas, our identity, learn language, and create our perception of reality. Shapes are quite literally building blocks for our consciousness, and we are naturally drawn to shapes as a means of recognition, perception, and expression in our lives. Experts agree that pattern recognition is an essential mode of our consciousness, affecting the way we shape our reality through our thoughts and meaning we derive from synchronistic experiences. These patterns are gauged and organized when observing experiences, movement, and behavior in both our physical world and within the energetic world of our consciousness and subconsciousness. This type of recognition assists us in perceiving common threads and interconnectedness within our intelligent and lively universe. The patterns within sacred geometry are also directly related to creation itself and can give us a clue as to how ancient civilizations used these shapes to describe the expansion of consciousness within the physical world. Try to imagine the original source, one consciousness, floating around in infinite space, without objects or any direction to speak of. There's no time or dimensions, just a void. This consciousness decides to expand itself from this emptiness so that movement can be observed. It first moves in 6 directions: up, down, backward, forward, left, and right. This produced space with a 360-degree view, which allowed for movement and more creation. When all of the ends of these directions are connected, a shape called an octahedron is created, which can be moved. When the octahedron is rotated around on one of its own axes, the points create a circle. From this space, consciousness begins to project itself into different and new directions, using the new space it has created. It should be mentioned that in sacred geometry, all straight lines are equivalent to male energy, and all curved lines are considered as female energy. First there was a masculine form, followed by the feminine form, much like the story about Adam and Eve. When another identical sphere is created within the process, it results in a very important geometrical shape known as Vesica Pisces. This shape contains information about width, depth, and proportion. But the most interesting thing about it is that it also contains information about light. This shape is found twice in the human body within the eye. Most specifically within the lens of the eye, which adjusts the focus of light. Even more interesting is the reference to the term God spoke in the story of the first day of creation, "Let there be light." At this exact moment of expansion, literally all the information of reality, consciousness, and light is contained in the new geometrical shape, rather than the original space it once contained. This is also an important shape used by the builder of the Pyramid of Giza and the Sphinx. The ratio of the outside of the pyramid can be traced back to the Vesica Pisces, which is also linked to the golden ratio spiral that theoretically has no beginning and no end. Another interesting thing to mention is that the human brain is extremely attracted to the golden ratio, most likely because it can be found almost anywhere you look. Our entire body, including organs, is made up of these proportions, and it can be found everywhere in nature and even within the solar system. This goes back to the pattern recognition earlier discussed. But back to the process of expansion. Pure consciousness begins expanding itself in new directions, and from each new perspective, relative movement can be achieved within a space that was once only a void. The process continues, and with each new sphere, more information and knowledge is acquired until the seed of life has been created. The seed of life, considered a universal symbol for creation, is thought to represent the seed from which all life was made. It is said to hold within it intelligent blueprints for life itself, and an entire encoded cosmology of consciousness through its shape, proportion, and harmony. This particular geometric shape is created with 7 circles that overlap one another. Some believe these 7 circles represent the 7 days of creation and the 7 chakras, and they also mirror our musical scales and the colors of the rainbow. From the creation of the seed of life, the process of expanding continues until 13 spheres have been created, forming the fruit of life, considered to be a blueprint for all material things. The fruit of life is composed of these 13 circles, and this number represents a transition between dimensions. For instance, in musical scales, there are 12 notes. When a 13th note is played, it is actually a repeat of the first note at a different frequency. In comparison, playing a higher frequency note in the game of life enters you into a higher dimension. When the 13 circles of the fruit of life are all connected with lines, 78 in total, it creates what is referred to as Metatron's cube. Metatron is known as an archangel who has been mentioned in Christian, Judaic, and Islamic religions. Known as the scribe of God, Metatron would have been given knowledge of the basic principles of creation. And interestingly enough, this formation contains all 5 of the 3D shapes in geometry known as platonic solids. In other words, in 3D form, it contains every possible geometric law that makes up physical reality, making it fundamental to the creation process. A concept begins mentally first before it is born into physical fact, and this shape represents the creator's mental universe and the evolution of a 2-dimensional reality into a 3-dimensional reality. The expansion continues further until 19 spheres have been created. This produces the ancient geometrical pattern known as the flower of life, with the seed of life at the heart of its center. The typical artistic impression of the flower of life always stops after 19 circles. It is said that this particular shape was so powerful and sacred that in ancient times it was forbidden to allow it to become common knowledge. These past civilizations understood the energetic nature of existence, and more modern science and quantum physics have begun to confirm the significance of these sacred geometric forms as representing the building blocks of our physical universe. In addition to the seed of life, the flower of life also contains other patterns such as the tree of life. The grid of life, the last shape I will discuss for the purposes of this video, is a 64-star tetrahedron. A tetrahedron is one of the 5 platonic solids as discussed in Metatron's cube. This pattern is known as the masculine equivalent to the flower of life pattern. The number 64 is significant in that we can find this in many natural orders, codes, and ancient principles of life. There are 64 codons in human DNA. There were 64 generations between Adam and Jesus. 64 is used in computer programming, and there are 64 hexagrams in I Ching. It is also the smallest number with exactly 7 divisors, which references back to the 7 days of creation. And it is the first whole number that is both a perfect square and a perfect cube. It has been stated that when the 64 tetrahedron pattern is placed on top of the flower of life pattern, that the spheres represent space and the lines represent where space and time come together. Because the spheres of the flower of life represent the female elements of creation, these spheres provide the field for the 78 male elements of creation, which are represented by the lines that are formed. Could it be that this is the same path each of our spirits has taken to manifest itself into physical existence? After all, This pattern of expansion can be seen within the uterus when life is developing. At the beginning of life in the womb, we are simply nothing more than a geometrical form. We each began as a sphere before the creation of our human bodies. And then we were a sphere within a sphere. In fact, all life has geometrical patterns running through them, and every known form of life begins as a single sphere, expanding itself into creation. Creation is the beginning of everything. Without it, nothing can ever happen. At the basis of creation, consciousness is needed. Everything originates from consciousness and is created from it. And each sacred geometrical shape is shown to correspond to an important step in the creation process. These principles are linked to the Big Bang Theory, the creation of the human body, and comprise the building blocks of ancient architecture. And although this information can only begin to open one up to the comprehension of a small part of universal reality, I encourage you to further explore the ancient secrets of sacred geometry and the knowledge it holds regarding creation and our universe as a whole.